Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 2CTV with your latest update from the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a rough ride for the Metropolitan Police and the authorities over the last few weeks and months. There's been a lot of pressure on the system in general, and especially when it came to the situation we've had recently with the court ruling obviously against the police officer that shot Chris Kaba. But we're going to be talking about everything that's happened since and what was about to happen, which was a completely chaotic situation that they tried their best to prevent it. They tried to their best to stop any sort of chaos happening in London, specifically London, of course, in the UK. So we're going to talk about everything because the military, they decided to secretly deploy hundreds of British soldiers onto the streets of London. Hundreds of soldiers were secretly deployed to London over fears that armed officers would walk out if Martin Blake was convicted. Now, this whole thing has been completely a shambolic situation anyway. There are good police officers working for a system that is completely messed up. The leadership and the command of the authorities, the Metropolitan Police, for example, when it comes to Mark Rowley, when it comes to Sadiq Khan or Sad IQ Khan, have been shambolic, have been corrupt, have been lying to the public, and have been having a two-tier system, as you guys know. Now, there have been a number of armed police officers who were completely terrified of what's going to happen if Martin Blake was being convicted as a criminal. If he was found guilty, then they were all going to be walking out. And this isn't really the first time. The reason that this emergency happened, which I'm going to explain why, was because of 2 years ago, when Chris Kaba was actually killed. So an emergency contingency plan was drafted as firearms officers in the Meds MO19 Specialist Firearms Command threatened action. There was a massive internal conflict inside at the top of the Metropolitan Police, and they didn't really tell anybody in the public. Like, nobody knew. There were already a number of armed police officers who were not just ready to hand in their notice, but also at the time they left the service. Well, they call it police service now. You can't say police force anymore, but it's police force. 2 years ago, when Chris Kaba, the criminal, a violent criminal, who 6 days before he was shot, when he was killed by the police because he was resisting arrest, and in case you don't know, this is basically the BLM movement is now on the rise in the UK because they want to make this the George Floyd moment for Britain. He was a criminal. 6 days before he shot someone, he was already convicted before. The car he was driving was it's connected to the firearm. He not only resisted arrest, he used the car that he was driving as a weapon. He was going to run over people just to avoid getting arrested. And the police stopped him because he was an imminent threat. Now, the firearm police officers, they are very different to the normal police officers that you see on the streets. They are under a lot of pressure. You've seen, some of you already know the story a few months ago about the Manchester airport incident, where a couple of Islamic brothers decided to attack firearms police officers in the middle of an airport, which is a very risky thing to do. The officers were so scared because of all these things that happen that they had to restrain themselves. The brothers could have been an imminent threat. The police officers had every right to shoot them, but they still didn't. They used their legs and their feet to stop them, to stop the brothers. Yet, they still got suspended by the police, by the Greater Manchester Police, because the media showed out of context footage and images of the moment the police officers in the Manchester airport stopped the attack. And then everybody said basically that the council culture, the left-wing activists, they all started the usual wave. Chris Kaba, the criminal who's now dead, we are already seeing protests on the streets of London because of the BLM movement, the other Marxist groups, George Soros-linked organizations who are funded now by Alex Soros. The police are panicking that they had to prepare this emergency plan. It makes sense. Over 300 Met Arms officers have handed in their weapons in protest at the treatment of the colleague charged with the murder of Chris Kaba. That was at the time. Now, obviously, the court case went through, and yesterday we had the verdict, and the ruling was the police officer was not guilty. But we've already lost many good armed police officers because of this. So they had no other option but to deploy the military, actual soldiers, onto the streets of London because there are sensitive locations that need to be protected, especially now. The increased threat of terrorism and everything else, and chaos in general, means the Houses of Parliament require armed police officers. Downing Street required police officers. Buckingham Palace, many other places, stations, train stations, airports. We didn't have enough. We were going to lose even more armed police officers. And these are the professional ones. These are the ones that we're supposed to be trusting. And they were so terrified of what's going to happen if they actually do their job properly, which is, if there's an imminent threat, you have to take them out. So they had to use the soldiers. But the problem is that they deployed hundreds of British soldiers, but they didn't tell anybody because it would have probably created more chaotic fear. But now it's out. And the Telegraph has also verified that story and the papers. Now, there's not going to be much about this when it comes to broadcast media. They're not really going to be covering this much. The papers have already covered this now. But you're not going to see much of this on BBC News or Sky News or all the other channels. Because, again, they think that this will create more chaos and more fear. Some of this goes back to these guys as well. The Royal Regiment of Scotland troops and military drivers from the Engineers and the Royal Logistics Corps were also put on standby. So all the way from Scotland, they were also put on standby to be ready to come to London to protect the city. Now, doesn't this send a weird message to those who want to join, the good people who want to join the police force, and also the good people who want to join the army in general? Because they're saying, hang on. So the police officers, the armed police officers, are not being treated correctly, because if they do their job properly, they get punished instead of being praised. Then we're going to use the soldiers. If I were a soldier and if I was asked to do that, I would say, well, what if I'm now on duty and I have to do what the armed police officers would have done, but the armed police officers have now resigned, they've all left, so I'm there. Well, I'm still going to get cancelled. So there is no incentive right now. But right now, they're going around arresting normal people for protesting and shouting, like Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch died in prison. There still has not been proper coverage by the mainstream media. We still have not heard, as far as I know, the last time I checked was about 3 hours ago, have not heard anything from the top mainstream party leaders, the top three mainstream parties, the Labour Party, the Tory Party and Reform UK. Nothing from Keir Starmer, nothing from Rishi Sunak and nothing from Nigel Farage. The deputy leader of Reform, Richard Tice, has spoken. He did it very quickly, but he was the only one of those in the position of leadership. His deputy leader, technically it's still leadership. Peter Lynch, they say he killed himself. There's not proper coverage on the media. The investigation is ongoing. It's a mysterious death. There are many other questions that might not get answered. But we care about the safety of people around the country. Now, I'm glad that the judge, and the jury, picked the right path. The verdict was correct. He was not guilty. He did his job. He eliminated an imminent threat. We would have lost even more armed police officers, and then we would have had been forced to use more military personnel to come on the streets of London to keep us safe. It should not be the job of the army to be told to come here and there every single time something happens. We're supposed to be having a different tier levels in terms of the safety and security of this nation. Now, the ex-Met PC Tony Long, who was also in trouble back in the day and a few years ago, and he was cleared, he said, "It is unfair to ask officers to carry firearms for public protection and then treat them as criminals if they actually use them." Tony Long is correct. What is the incentive of actually being a good person, good public servant, and doing your job when you actually get punished for doing your job? There are many people right now And these are good patriotic people in the country who are no longer motivated to even join the armed forces anymore because they say, well, who am I going to serve? Keir Starmer, for example? So we have deep problems, culturally and societally, especially when it comes to different generations. Now, the older generation are still more patriotic. What's going to happen in about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time? Do they actually have a plan for basic cultural values that would raise kids to be protectors of this kingdom? Or are we just going to create more wishy-washy generations and we're just going to rely on foreign labor to come and do our work? What is the plan? Destruction? Reset? What do you want to do? Because apparently looking after your country is a very backwards way mentality, and then that means that you want to go back to the 1930s apparently. That's the message they're sending out. Let's get some reaction from you guys in the live chat. First super chat from Dave. Keir Stasi will declare martial law. He won't dare. Mike says a two-tier queer is panicking to put troops on the streets as state of martial law must be declared in parliament. Yeah, that's not going to happen. His family are disgraceful for trying to portray him as an innocent victim. Will they apologize to the armed officer and his family for dragging him through this ridiculous process? This is about Chris Kaba, right? Not only that, we now have people on Chris Kaba's side, even relatives and friends and all the other gangsters, making him the martyr that he was the victim apparently. When are we going to say enough is enough? We have a rule-based society for a reason. We have to respect the actual text and the way the system works. There are people in the system and the political establishment who have no respect for it, and they create corruption and they do lies. We know that. But the actual system itself, the structure, who is going to be protecting it? Who's going to be fighting it? In America, we have Donald Trump saying, I will make America great again. Here, the basic solutions that we need are not actually being provided by the mainstream politicians, for example, or political movements. You know, for example, Nigel Farage and Reform UK don't even want to talk about mass deportations. We have tens of thousands of foreign criminals. We have hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants and actual extremists who are on the list. The authorities are watching them and they're still freely walking around the streets, but we're not allowed to talk about deporting them. When did that become a controversial thing? It was always a norm in every nation throughout history. Protect your country and your borders. Why is that controversial now? Devin Lilly says, patriotic lives matter, our culture matters, our children's future matters. Be English, be proud, and be brave. Stand up and be proud. Thank you, Maya and Tommy, for bringing the truth. Rest in peace, Peter Lynch. Absolutely. Epic 2000 says, the socialist workers is stirring it up. Bunch of smelly hippies. First says, BLM confirmed Marxists, their only objective confirmed by them, the destruction of capitalism. And they are allowed to march. This is the fascinating part, by the way, because so in the 20th century, in the middle of the Cold War, and especially the beginning of the Cold War between the Soviet side and the Western side, you know, they called it the American side, but it was the whole of the West. Some, especially in America, went a little bit too far, right? In terms of physically cancel culture. Anybody who was a communist was in massive trouble. Now, we could have moderated that, but we did overcorrection, which means we basically said, oh, we were mean to some communists who were literally revolutionary, wanted to bring down the capitalist system and the democracy, right? The Western system. Then we decided to say, you know what? You guys are allowed to do whatever you want. You could infiltrate our schools, our universities, our cultural institutions, CNN, the BBC, political parties will be allowed to do whatever they want. What is the plan here? You are having people who literally want to destroy the system and the civilization and the culture. And the job of the state and the authorities, so that includes MI5, GCHQ, and all the others as well, and of course the palace, let's not forget about the crown. The job is stability and safety of the nation. That is simply their job. Now, the political side and Foreign Office and all the others, they also come up with strategies. Sometimes the strategy is to take over the world. Sometimes it's to influence other countries for your own interests. That's geopolitics. We get it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. These days, mostly bad. But the reason that they, for example, treat any sort of nationalist as a far-right threat, as opposed to actual far-right threat, the revolutionary ethno-nationalists, but they treat anybody who's patriotic and basic nationalists as a threat, right? Any football hooligan, football far-right thug, everybody's a threat, right? Because they've been told, the people who join MI5 and GCHQ and all these guys, the Home Office in general, they've been fed all this nonsense for years and years since they were kids. They go to schools and universities, they get fed by all these cultural Marxist idiots. And then they are told, yes, Tommy Robinson is a dangerous threat, right? And they fear that if, for example, Tommy says something, he could bring out a big group of people and they could, for example, attack Parliament. And that's a fear that they have. They haven't done their homework into the mentality of almost every single Tommy supporter. Now, there will be some people who are ethno-nationalists and there are people who are revolutionary, people who get drunk and do crazy things and get angry. There's a difference between someone who's angry, for example, what happened after Southport when 3 little girls lost their lives. People got angry. People become irrational. People might even become a little bit violent. Obviously, it's against the law. You stop it. You contain the situation. That's your job as the authorities. There is a difference between them, heat of the moment, and those who are proactively planning long-term revolutionary tendencies to bring down the system from within. And you are allowing that to happen. And that's fine. And if we ask questions, we are the problem. And we are the ones causing hate and division, apparently. Do your job. Sharky says woke is collapsing. We have a very massive and generous super chat from Queen Hader. Well, that is lovely, by the way. You didn't have to do that. That's massive. Saying much love to all the patriots. I wish I could be there with you. A big respect to you, Maya. And kisses for Bumban. Thank you very much. I don't know what else to say about this. It's so unnecessary, by the way. Thank you. Let's go to some also non-super chats while we're here. I am worried that they're going to send an Islamist in to kill Tommy and say that he was acting alone, just like they have tried with Trump. My senses are never wrong. He needs protection big time. But there are people who want to take him out in general anyway. But I don't think there's a need for the establishment, because they have to also be strategical about this. So, for example, those who say there are people in the deep state in America, and when their plan failed to stop Trump from actually standing, they said, well, let's just find a way to eliminate him. They at least had discussions, right? And then they found lone wolves to act alone, right? That's what they did. Because Trump is an imminent threat to them and their way of life, the establishment. It's a big risk when you do something like that. But for someone like Trump, from their perspective, with someone like Trump, it's worth it because he's the big figure. Even though it would have been a stupid thing to go and take out Trump, because you make him a martyr, you're going to cause a civil war, you idiots. But with someone like Tommy, from this perspective of anybody, the vested interest or anybody in the state, it's just not worth it. Why would you? But there are definitely groups, there are extremist individuals and groups who are after Tommy and people like Tommy. You know my situation. If they come after me, and I'm still not a big threat compared to someone like Trump, for example. He's a bigger influence than me in terms of power. The fact that they want to kill me, well, I mean, part of it is just the Islamic Republic of Iran, because there's a fatwa against me in my life. That's different. But the random weirdos in London. And then now they're not even looking after their own police officers. The armed police officers leaving the force or the service. They are not being treated right. The rest of them are being told you have to be woke. The leadership and the command have no idea what they're doing. You cannot tell me Mark Rowley knows what he's doing. And we're losing the good people. And now they need the army to replace them. Really? Now, luckily, the court verdict, the ruling was not guilty. Imagine if it was guilty. All those hundreds of armed police officers were going to walk out. End. That's it. Parliament would not be protected. Downing Street would not be protected. Train stations would not be protected. Airports. You're going to have more armed forces personnel. That's just embarrassing. It looks like a completely militarized state. You can't have the army doing the job of the police. Because they can't even find enough people to join the police force. It's so embarrassing. Who wants to do that job? Could this be the first step to a civil war? I'm not sure. Phil says the UK is a country living in total fear. Powered, mad individuals should not be in positions of power. The UK has a tumor of corruption. We used to constitutionally rely on the crown to be to do the checks and balances. I'm not really sure what the palace is doing these days. When Elizabeth II was alive, it was still very, very different. People still at least felt safer in terms of constitutionally and everything else with Elizabeth. Even those who didn't really support her, for example. Constitutionally, she was a good protector of the crown. And the job of the king and queen is to protect the crown. The crown matters. It's not about the king or the queen. They are human. The crown must win. Crown must always win. That is the whole point. That is the constitution. Smokey SGT says November, remember, the 5th of November. It will be the beginning of the end. It won't. Jason says, what are the chances the military was called in ahead of an announcement of Islamist involvement in Peter Lynch's death or to deter Saturday's event? No, it was primarily because of Chris Kaba, the violent criminal who was killed by an armed police officer. That created more chaos and fear. And now the BLM and the far left are trying to turn him into the British George Floyd. We are already seeing protests already on the streets. Because they don't want to accept the verdict. It's completely embarrassing. Anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the latest update from the state of this so-called United Kingdom. I'm Maya Tusi, and we are the media.